Right now, America is facing what might be its most severe housing crisis since the Great Depression. Home sales have plummeted to their lowest levels in over a decade. Young people are being priced out entirely. Construction sites sit stalled across the nation. The housing market, which has been the backbone of American wealth for generations, is entering what experts are calling a deep freeze, and nobody seems to know how to stop it. Here's what this looks like for everyday Americans. Imagine saving for years to buy your first home, only to discover that the average homebuyer is now 56 years old, the highest in recorded history. That's the reality for millions of American families today, and the numbers reveal just how alarming the situation really is. To understand how we got here, we need to look at the statistics. Sales of previously owned homes just fell again in April, hitting their slowest pace since 2009. But here's what makes this truly shocking. In 2009, there were 306 million people living in the United States. Today, there are 340 million people. That's 34 million more potential homebuyers. Yet, we're seeing the same depressed sales levels as during the Great Recession. This is not a blip. It's a breakdown of what home ownership used to represent in America. Sales declined 0.5% from March to a seasonally adjusted rate of just 4 million units. That may seem small, but in a healthy market, spring sales usually rise. Instead, we're moving backward despite having significantly more people who should be buying homes. It's the double prison: high rates and high prices. You see, what makes this housing crisis worse is that Americans are trapped between two crushing forces: mortgage rates that have skyrocketed and home prices that refuse to come down. Interest rates have climbed from historic lows to levels that make home ownership mathematically impossible for most working families. A typical mortgage payment that might have been $1,500 just a few years ago is now $2,500 or more for the same house. Most families simply cannot absorb that kind of financial pressure, and that's not the only problem. You might expect that with such low demand, home prices would start falling. Instead, we're seeing a paradox that defies basic economics. Active listings hit their highest level since March 2020, climbing 16.7% year over year. New listings rose to their highest level since July 2022. More homes are available, yet prices remain stubbornly high. Perhaps the most devastating consequence of this housing crisis is what's happening to young Americans. The average age of home buyers has surged from 49 in 2023 to 56 today. That is a historic high, up from an average age in the low to mid-40s in the early 2010s. Now just think about what this means. An entire generation is being systematically excluded from home ownership. As one mortgage industry veteran put it, "In my 2 decades in the mortgage business, I've never seen a more difficult time for millennials to purchase a home." This goes beyond housing. It affects families, it affects communities, and it affects all future generations. In American culture, home ownership has traditionally been a rite of passage, a symbol of independence and stability. When most young couples can't purchase a home until their late 30s, something has gone fundamental wrong with our economic system. Behind these statistics are real people facing impossible choices. A Redfin agent in Portland explains what she's seeing. A lot of people are selling their homes and downsizing because they're worried about the economy. During the pandemic, everybody wanted more space for a home office or for their kids to run around. But now, people are more focused on saving money. She's working with federal employees who are afraid of losing their jobs, so they're selling their homes and moving into condos. Investment properties are being dumped on the market as owners realize they can no longer afford the carrying costs. There's been a clear psychological shift. Optimism has turned to fear. Buyers are now hesitant and sellers are rushing to cut losses. This represents a massive change in American psychology, from optimistic expansion to fearful contraction. The implications for consumer confidence and economic growth are absolutely staggering. Now we're starting to see the first signs that this frozen market might be ready to crack. Zillow reports that home values have fallen in 27 U.S. states so far this year. Florida, Colorado, Washington, D.C., California, and Washington State have experienced the greatest value declines from March to April. We may be seeing the first cracks of a nationwide housing correction. But, and it's a big but, here's the terrifying part. If housing prices start falling, like we saw in 2008 and 2009, that could rival or even surpass the damage seen back then. Banks across America have trillions of dollars in mortgage loans on their books. A significant drop in home values could trigger a banking crisis of unprecedented scale. Making matters even worse, employers continue to conduct mass layoffs across the nation, which only increases pressure on an already fragile housing market. Walmart just announced it's laying off about 1,500 well-paid corporate employees in Arkansas. Now, these aren't minimum wage retail workers. These are mid to high-level professionals, the kind of buyers who historically drive the housing market. Now, when major corporations start cutting their highest-paid employees, it sends shock waves through local housing markets. These are the people who had the income to qualify for mortgages even at today's elevated rates and elevated prices. The broader context makes this housing crisis even more alarming. According to a recent national survey, financial stress is at an all-time high for 70% of the U.S. population. Absurdly high housing costs, both for purchasing and renting, are one of the biggest reasons why so many Americans are financially stressed right now. Think about the psychological impact of this. When 7 out of 10 Americans are experiencing unprecedented financial stress, largely due to housing costs, this is an economic, mental health, and political crisis rolled into one. This crisis has created a stark division in American society. If you were able to purchase a home and lock in a mortgage more than 5 years ago, you were extraordinarily fortunate. You're essentially part of a protected class. Your housing costs are fixed, while everyone else faces an increasingly impossible market. But those who wish to relocate now face ridiculously high prices and painfully high interest rates. It's created a kind of economic segregation where your housing situation depends entirely on when you happen to make your purchase decision. The timing couldn't have been more crucial. Millions of Americans who waited to make their move have now been completely priced out. They're locked out of home ownership, potentially for years to come. So, what can be done? The Fed now faces a no-win situation. The reality is that either interest rates will have to come down dramatically, or housing prices will have to fall significantly. Oh no, there's no middle ground that makes homes affordable for average Americans again. Most of the U.S. population simply cannot afford to shell out several $1,000s for a mortgage payment every month. If they cut interest rates aggressively, they risk reigniting inflation in other sectors of the economy. If they keep rates high, they risk triggering a housing market collapse that could devastate the banking system and throw millions of Americans underwater on their mortgages. The Fed is stuck in a dangerous standoff, hoping the system holds. The housing market is entering what can only be described as a very difficult chapter. We're likely to see one of three scenarios unfold over the next 12-18 months. First, the Federal Reserve could aggressively cut interest rates, making homes more affordable, but potentially triggering inflation in other areas of the economy. Second, home prices could begin falling significantly, making properties more affordable, but potentially triggering a banking crisis as mortgage loans go underwater. Third, we could see a prolonged period of market stagnation where very few transactions occur, essentially freezing the housing market for years. None of these scenarios are particularly appealing, but the status quo is clearly unsustainable. This crisis cuts deeper than real estate. It shakes the foundation of the American promise. For generations, Americans have been told that if they work hard, if they save money, if they play by the rules, they can achieve home ownership and build wealth through real estate. That promise now rings hollow for millions of young Americans who are doing everything right, but still can't afford to buy a home. When the basic elements of middle-class life becomes unattainable for people with good jobs and solid incomes, it raises profound questions about the sustainability of our economic system. The uncomfortable truth is that America's housing market has painted itself into a corner. Decades of policies that treated housing as an investment rather than a necessity have created a system that serves existing homeowners at the expense of everyone else. What we're experiencing now is not a temporary market adjustment. It's the inevitable result of fundamental imbalances that have been building for many years. Young Americans have been systematically priced out of home ownership. Working families are spending unsustainable percentage of their income on housing, and the entire system is now so fragile that any significant shock could trigger a cascade of failures. For millions of families, the dream of home ownership feels completely out of reach. The question now is whether we're willing to do what it takes to revive it, or whether we'll continue down this path until the entire housing market implodes. Time is running out to change course, and millions are already behind. We hope you found this insightful. Share this with friends and family. Please subscribe. We look forward to reading your comments, and thank you as always for watching.